Today, I have another guest on my channel, and her name is Tani Roberts. And she's actually one of my subscribers who I've been working with behind the scenes on some of my videos. She sent me the information on a 1973 watchtower that was normalizing child abuse. And she's also the one that sent me the information on the luxury apartments, the International Bible Students Association. And those are actually two of my biggest growing videos. So I do have her to thank for some of the incredible information that she continues to send me. Now, the reason I asked her to come on my show this week is because the last thing that she sent me was something that's a huge breakthrough. It's something that every other XJW channel that has covered this subject had completely missed the point. I know that's a big claim to make, but this is a huge breakthrough. And when she sent me the information on it and explained it to me, I just thought, okay, I have to cover this. And I need her assistance also because she's the one that uncovered this information. So the information is basically about the whole Pillowgate video. And what most Jehovah's Witnesses, I'm sorry, what most XJWs have missed, because most of the channels that covered the whole Pillowgate scandal is kind of like a big joke, right? In fact, almost every other XJW that covers that, they kind of just make it humorous and it's a masturbation video, not to masturbate. But what what Tani discovered is the fact that the video is the exact opposite of what everybody thought that it was. It's not an anti-masturbation video. It's actually heavy duty brainwashing. It's brainwashing to the point where what's really going on is they're using hypnosis and brainwashing to turn young Bethelites that are inexperienced. And I'm going to have to just be blunt the way that I say this, but it's meant to turn them into homosexual predators. Homosexual predators. And I don't say that to say anything bad about homosexuals. I think that religion has their own motive for saying that God hates them and they're going to burn in hell and all that crap. But so nothing against homosexuals, but this is basically what the purpose of the video was, to brainwash them and to turn them into basically sexual predators. And I know that may sound kind of hard to believe, but we're going to break this down to show you that the whole video is a brainwashing session to turn them into sexual predators, basically. Um, but thank you, Tani, for coming on my channel and helping me break down this tough subject because a lot of other channels don't really cover these subjects that well. But thank you for helping me explain this and coming on my channel.
Yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk on your channel and expose Watchtower in this way. I really wanted to talk about the Pillowgate video because of what I see in the video that's disturbing, and it really illustrates and shows you the ways in which Watchtower controls its members, particularly from the top down. Mm.
Yeah, and if I could just ask one question, just how long have you been awake to the Jehovah's Witness religion? Because I know you were raised a Jehovah's Witness, but
Yeah,
when did you start to wake up?
so um, it's difficult for me to answer that question because while I've been out of the religion for a long time, I wasn't fully awake to it until I started watching your channel. And then I understood some of the deep psychological brainwashing behind it. But I would say I've been out for maybe 12 years, physically out. But mentally, I've only been free of the religion for maybe about the last 2 years, I'd say, that I really started to unpack the brainwashing and the programming that Watchtower has on people.
Yeah, and it's definitely nice to hear you say that because that's really what I set to do on my channel is I really want to deconstruct all the brainwashing and really break it down. So to
Mhm.
hear that someone like yourself, who's very intelligent, was helped by my information, it helps me continue to do what I'm doing. So I appreciate that feedback as well.
Mm. Yeah.
So let me get to the first document that you're going to share with us. Okay, so could you tell us what this is that we're going to look at?
Okay. So this is the dwelling together in unity document. Um, what this is when Bethelites arrive at Bethel, it's like a guidebook that they're given to life at Bethel, and it has what I call a slave contract in it. And so this is basically it has all the rules and regulations. It's an introduction booklet that they would get along with the Pillowgate video that we're going to show you. And it also has a vow of poverty in it. Yeah. If we can just scroll down.
Yeah, and I just want to explain quick to the audience. So you see that
Mhm.
this book was written in 2004, but it says 2020 printing. So this is a book that they obviously still print and they still use. So this is something that Bethelites are currently still having to go through this book.
Yeah, and it's not something that's available to the general Jehovah's Witness population. It is a book that they're given, and they're given it along with their Bethel keys, and then they're told to return it if they are removed from Bethel or they leave Bethel for any reason. This book needs to be returned with their keys.
And that's a red flag right there, just to put it out there.
Yeah, it's very internal. They're keeping it hush hush as usual.
Okay, so this is page 14. And yeah, so the vow of obedience to poverty, right? So this is pretty interesting because I'd never seen this book, and from what you're saying too, no Jehovah's Witnesses would see this except Bethelites, and when
Yeah,
they leave, they have to give it back with their keys. So it's a very secretive book.
yeah, and I wasn't aware of it. I've never been to Bethel. I wasn't aware of their internal policies and how they do things. Yeah, I was never that high up in the Jehovah's Witness religion to be privy to this information.
Good for you, because what we're going to see is the higher you get in this organization, the more psychologically messed up they make you. So good for you.
Mhm.
Okay, so which point did you want to start off with?
So I just wanted to say that this is a vow. This vow of poverty is something that they take on in service of the organization. So what it is a vow of obedience and poverty to the organization. You're giving over any form of agency that you might have and putting yourself in the hands of the organization. All your decisions will be subject to the governing body or the organization. There's not anything that's private. It seems when you're at Bethel, everything is open for discussion. You have no privacy from what I've read from this document. And the reason I call it a slave contract is because it's a vow of poverty. And if you're reliant on someone for food and for shelter and for your basic needs, then you're essentially a slave to them.
Yeah, that's crazy. So, okay, so
So I
what?
think point number 6,
Okay,
I was particularly interested in. So this is essentially the poverty part of it. And it says to turn over to the local organization of the order all income received from any work or personal efforts in excess of the necessary living expenses, unless released from this vow by the order. And so that it's whatever they deem necessary, which from what I've heard from experiences at Bethel is just your basic necessities. You can't acquire any wealth. And that would include, if you inherited something from a relative, if you were promoted, you're basically giving all of your income and your time to Watchtower.
Yeah, and that's crazy because I never heard of that. But it's very clear, like turn over basically your income except for what's
Mm.
necessary.
Mm.
Yeah, so maybe that's like if someone's getting like if they're getting a pension or something or any sort of, I don't know, money for anything that they're basically saying give us all your money except for what you need to eat off of, basically.
Yeah, yeah. And on point number 7, they're saying they're going to provide you with meals, lodging, and other reimbursements for expenses. So you basically you can apply for any money you've spent. They're treating it like a business, and you can be reimbursed for stuff, but you have to go through them.
Yeah. So then what other points did you want to bring out?
So that was the main point for that one. I just wanted to point out that it was this
Mhm.
vow of poverty.
Yeah, it's crazy too because it says foul poverty. Like
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
crazy.
It's slavery by another name.
So now we're going to basically go into the actual Pillowgate video. So as I mentioned earlier that well, a lot of people focused on the humorous aspect of the whole thing with masturbating with pillows and making a big joke out of it. It's really hypnotic programming and brainwashing to turn inexperienced young men into basically sexual predators. Tanya, do you want to explain a little bit how they do that?
Yeah, I totally understand why people are uncomfortable and laughing at it because it's not something that's easy to process, and the way that they're speaking is as if they're speaking to little children, and so the natural reaction to that is to laugh and kind of giggle about it, that it's uncomfortable. Um, but to your point, saying they make them into predators. The number one determinant, or one of the top determinants um, of if someone is going to abuse, is if they themselves were sexually abused. And just while you're watching this video, just keep in mind that sexual abuse is not only physical, there's a mental component to it. And that's part of the grooming aspect of it, is the lead up to the sexual abuse is a sort of mental preparation.
Yeah, so we're going to play this now, and we're going to stop in between to explain certain things. And it starts off a
Mm-hmm.
little slow, but one thing is that, you know what, maybe you can explain this too to my audience, is how what happens by dragging this out and kind of being kind of born with it, what eventually happens to the mind of the listener.
Yeah. So what you'll notice about this introduction video is he preps it by saying you're going to feel uncomfortable and to ignore your first reaction to reject the information. And then it's not till later in the end of the video that they get into some of the deep, more sadistic elements of it. And that's purposeful because by the end of the video, you're half asleep, it's dragged on, and you're more susceptible to their programming. Mm.
Yeah, and there's another good point with that too, is like at the conventions and assemblies, we're always
Mm.
so tired. It was so hard to stay awake at the district conventions and regional
Yeah.
conventions. So I think that's by design too, because when they put you in that state of being sleepy, you're more open to hypnosis, like what you're saying.
Yeah, and it sounds so comical, but when you think of hypnosis, the first thing they do is put you in a sleep state. You know, they say, "Oh, you're very sleepy, you're getting very sleepy," and that's classical hypnosis. And so, what these people do is they just drag it out so you're in a sleepy state. The way they talk is very slow and suggestive, and by the time you get three-quarters in, you're half asleep and you're susceptible. But you're a captive audience to them because you can't leave. You have to sit there and listen to it. And then you're also in a group. So you would be in a group setting when you're watching this. And then you get that herd mentality is when people are together and they're all watching and no one's leaving. You're not going to be the only one who gets up and leaves because you're uncomfortable.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that point because see, when we watched this before, like when we've seen parts of this on the internet, we laugh it off and we're not really realizing it that the Bethelites, like you said, they have to sit in their room and watch this. They can't get up and leave. They can't tune out. So that's a whole different environment where no matter how disturbing this video gets, they have to sit there and listen to the whole thing because they think it's, hey, this is from Jehovah. They better listen.
Yeah, and it is very uncomfortable. And so I was tossing and debating whether to actually do this video, but it's a really, really good example of what happens and the core beliefs at the top because the Bethelites have bought into the system. And in a sense, the veil is removed from what we think of Jehovah's Witnesses. So they've already bought in and they're going to be more honest with them.
Here at Bethel, we have some of the most outstanding young men in the organization. We are grateful to Jehovah for you and want to commend you for how hard you've worked to meet the high requirements to serve here.
So he said he wants to commend them for how hard they've worked to meet the high requirements to come to Bethel. Now, I want to mention that point because when we were Jehovah's Witnesses, we were told that in order to be a Bethelite, in order to go to Bethel, you have to be an exemplary example. And then, like, you would have to fill out a Bethel application, and they would ask you all these extensive questions. And I never qualified to go to Bethel. I might have later on, but I remember when I first got baptized, I wanted to go to Bethel and I got rejected. They said that I basically wasn't exemplary enough. This is like the first year I was baptized. So, but I think it's a known fact, and I don't know um what you've experienced in Australia where you grew up, but I know in the United States they put such a high standard on Bethelites. Like if you went to Bethel, that means that you're like a spiritual giant, like the Apostle Paul or something. Was that how you remembered the whole Bethelite thing that you had to be like basically a super spiritual giant to get acceptance of Bethel?
Yeah, I mean, I was obviously never invited to Bethel, but to my understanding, my family looked up to people. If there was someone who'd been at Bethel, it was like, oh my goodness, they were like superstars. Like they've been to Bethel, like they must be so spiritual. And but then what I also remember is if you ask them about it, they kind of wouldn't talk about it. It's like, don't talk about Fight Club kind of thing. I don't remember because I was curious about it. And sorry. So I was really curious about it. But when I asked them about it, they weren't willing to talk about it. And that's that's interesting that you were rejected though. Do you remember what the application process was like?
Yeah, so basically I got rejected. I think I was baptized about a year or so. And I remember I filled out the application and I gave it to the elder that was called the service overseer. That was his title. So the questions were very like they were not your average Jehovah's Witness applications. Like one question said something like, "Have you ever watched an R-rated movie? And if so, when's the last time you did it?" So that's like a really odd question. So And then another question was interesting is they even had a question on there that said something like, "Have you ever had a homosexual experience or something like that?" Or how was it worded? Have you ever been in a homosexual relationship? I think that's how it was worded. So there were some really odd questions. I just thought like these are weird questions. And then the other questions were standard, like, well, how long have you been in full-time service? How long have you been pioneering? Stuff like that. So it was just a lot of really strange questions. But anyway, so I filled it out and I gave it to my service overseer. And well, actually, before he even took it out of my hand, he basically had told me like basically it's not going to get approved, so we don't want you to waste your time. And what he was saying was that so the process is that the service committee, which is made up of the coordinator, the body of elders, the service
Mm.
overseer, and then the secretary, they're the ones that decide if they approve your Bethel application. So if you give them a Bethel application and they don't think you're qualified, then they're going to deny it. So he was basically telling me basically don't waste your time giving it to us because we're not going to approve it. And he wasn't like rude about it, but he was basically saying that, the elders already we already don't think that you're exemplary, you have a lot of work to do. So like he's kind of saying don't waste your time
Yeah.
filling it in because we're going to reject it. And I remember how like
So,
heartbroken I was over that.
what was your sense for the reason that they rejected you? What do you think the reason was?
So I the reason was that I didn't have any stats. I wasn't pioneering. And I was recently baptized, only been baptized a year, and at this point, I didn't even qualify to do like microphones. So,
Mm.
one of the things that they counseled me on was I wasn't very sociable. So, like, they said that like I need to like talk to the friends more, and I need to socialize more with the friends. So it was more so like they were scrutinizing just me not being the poster boy JW person. Like I wasn't exemplary. So
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
thank
so
goodness.
oh yeah, yeah.
That shows you exactly what they
Mhm.
want. They want someone who will toe the line,
Mhm.
follow directions without
Yeah,
questioning.
yeah.
It's sort of a selection process of
Mhm.
both you have to be very naive and very obedient. And so basically, based on the questions that you've said, that's what they're selecting for is young, naive, and obedient people.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
and one thing that I thought was weird too is when I had a question on have you ever had like a homosexual relationship, then it said
Yeah, that's
something
very
like, yeah, but then it said like, if so, how long ago was it? And I'm thinking, why does that matter? Because I'm thinking that if somebody answers yes to that question, wouldn't that be an automatic like you're denied? So
strange.
I'm like, what like how long ago was it? So it was weird because it made me think like, are they going to still accept you? Like, is there wiggle room with that question? Like it was weird the way that it was worded. Um, but
Yeah, it's like
basically,
a yeah.
but yeah, so basically, another thing that saved me was when I finally ended up becoming a ministerial servant and I qualified as supposedly exemplary, which that just means that I was brainwashed. But then my ex-wife, she didn't want to go to Bethel. So then I was saved because if I had applied later on, maybe I would have gotten in with her, but she didn't really want to go to Bethel. So then I never applied for it again. So I ended up avoiding the whole situation.
Mm. Mm. I
But
guess you weren't easily you're a bit of a rebel and you weren't easily convinced of things and you didn't toe the line enough for them to be accepted.
exactly. And one of the things I had a problem with when I mentioned the whole being sociable thing is that I've always
Yeah.
been a type of person where if people make me feel uncomfortable, I just don't want to hang out with them. But
Mm.
in Jehovah's Witness religion, you don't have any boundaries. So you basically have to basically kind of pretend to be nice to everybody. And I've always struggled with that. So one of the things that
Mm.
they seen was they thought I wasn't very spiritual because basically I wasn't going around kissing people's butt like a lot of brothers do who are trying to move up an organization.
Yeah, and I honestly had the same experience with them being very cliquey and I wasn't spiritual enough because I wasn't in with the cool crowd. So luckily, turns out.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. You're very lucky.
Mm.
But so I just wanted to, before we go on further, I want to
Mhm.
just emphasize the point that he mentioned how the people that got accepted reached such a high standard, right? A high
Mhm.
standard. So if these people who are selected have such a high standard, then why is it all this training that they have to go through, which we're going to get into, but all the pillowgate stuff we're going to get into, if they're exemplary, then why do they need all this training? They're training them as if they're not exemplary. So there's a contradiction there. You have to be so spiritual to get into Bethel, but then they give you this training as if you're worldly, right? Like you're bad association. Because wouldn't spiritual people already know all the stuff they're going to talk about? Like, don't they already know they shouldn't be? Well, we'll get into it. Yes, but just
Yeah,
keep that in
I
mind.
have
Oh,
some
go ahead.
thoughts on it, but I will talk about it a bit into the video.
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
There's a particular requirement that Jehovah expects of all who worship him that we want to discuss with you. At 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 16, he says, "You must be holy because I am holy." So, what exactly does it mean to be holy? It means to keep clean before Jehovah and not let sin or the world contaminate us. That's not easy for an imperfect man, but it certainly isn't beyond us either. Jehovah expects us to imitate him to the best of our ability and love what's right and hate what's bad. Each of us has to daily work at keeping our conduct clean, according to Jehovah's standards in the Bible. If we don't, our service to him will become contaminated and won't please him. The governing body loves you and wants you to experience the great joy that comes from serving Jehovah with a clean conscience. They also want you to avoid the deep pain that comes with sinning against him. That's why we're going to share with you frank and specific counsel related to matters of conduct in two areas. First, your personal habits, and second, your dealings with others. We'll see some dangers you need to keep on guard against in these areas, and then how you can keep your path clean. There is no reason to be embarrassed about what we're going to discuss. You need to understand these matters to keep clean before Jehovah and enjoy his blessing. To begin, let's see 3 ways in which Jehovah's Word helps you to keep your personal habits clean. The first way you can do this is by avoiding tight-fitting clothes that can identify you with homosexuality.
So I want to stop there because it's only 2 minutes into the video, and that's the first thing that he mentions. And I just think that's kind of weird because why would that be the first thing to mention? One, if you have to be exemplary to get into Bethel and you had to reach such a high standard, then this should not be one of the first things that come up because this shouldn't be a room of people who are extremely spiritual already. And the majority of people are not homosexual. So why would that be the very first thing that he mentions? And as we go on, you're going to see that, or at least from the way I'm interpreting it, that I think that's part of the brainwashing already. That's the basically the first thing that he mentions is is something like that. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or not.
Oh, well, the way I interpret that is that these people have come from their congregations and they've been accepted into Bethel. So they're coming in sort of feeling good about themselves. So the way I interpret this is it's just them reinforcing that you're still not good enough. Like you might be the best in your congregation, but when you get here, you're underneath us and you need to you're still imperfect, if that makes sense, is the way that I interpret what he's just said.
Yeah, that is another
What
way
kind of clothes?
to look at it, definitely. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. And the way he's speaking to them is the way you speak to little children, as if they were in kindergarten or primary school, saying, it's very uncomfortable, but we're going to have to talk about it. And that's something that's throughout Jehovah's Witness literature, and you'll see on their website, is the way that they speak to people is very childlike and it's very demeaning.
Are we talking?
Yeah, and I think too how again, so if they're exemplary, it's like, why are they even going through this stuff too? Because shouldn't they have worked out those issues before they got accepted into Bethel? But so I don't know. That's weird too to me. I don't know.
Definitely. And that's the psychology. That's one of the things that I'm trying to get at is that the selection process selects for people who are very naive and then them bringing up these subjects. So they're making sure that you've never had any experience. And so that they're the ones to bring these sort of illicit thoughts into your head. And so that's an aspect of control as well. But I'll get into that later in the video when it comes up.
Yep.
Yeah.
About? Some outfits are designed to feminize a man's appearance, as homosexuals try to do, especially displaying the buttocks and genitals. Why? Because it makes it harder to tell the difference between a homosexual and a heterosexual man.
And one thing I want to mention too is that he didn't have to go as far as to say displaying the buttocks and genitals. Like he could have simply just said, don't wear clothes that are too tight because it will identify with homosexuals. But you could
Exactly. Yeah.
he's putting those graphic images in the head of the listener, basically saying buttocks and genitals. Well, if you're sitting there listening to it, you're going to picture that in your head because he's putting it in your head. So you so it's like he's unnecessarily putting buttocks and genitals in the minds of the people listening to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Making homosexual.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to press play. You had a thought too?
Yeah, this is a theme that they're so concerned with homosexuals. Like you said, there was a question to see whether someone had homosexual tendencies and whether they'd be willing to admit it. And so you think they would have already selected for that. I don't know many men who are on the fence about them being homosexual or not. So yeah, I just feel very uncomfortable about him at this moment.
Yeah, I know it's hard to watch. But that's a good point you mentioned because yeah, that's already a question on the application. So why do they keep like if they pass that point, why is this the very first thing that all the Bethelites need to hear about?
Yeah, and if anyone's been to Bethel and they've ticked that box, just let us know.
Yeah, I'm curious too, would they still let them in? Because again, there was a follow-up question that said, if so, how long? Like when's the like so the whole thing is weird.
Sexuals blend in. So these clothes contribute to changing people's opinion of homosexuality because they come to see it as normal and acceptable. We know that you never intentionally promote that practice, but the question is, how?
And I'm going to try to pause this. When he said that we know you would never, how did he say it? Promote that practice. It looked
Yeah.
like he had this creepy smile on his face when he said that. Let me just see if I can catch it right.
Because they come to see it as normal and acceptable. We know that you.
I don't know if I'm going to be able to get it right, but I swear he had a smile on his face when he said that.
Changing people's opinion of homosexuality because they come to see it as normal and acceptable. We know that you never intentionally promote that practice, but the question.
I don't know. I could be seeing things, but I thought he smiled a little bit when he was saying it. But
you'll notice throughout the clip though, he's almost licking his lips. So when he says certain things, he's got this look on his face like he's enjoying it. He's enjoying, and this is one of the things that I noticed when I first watched the video, is his posture. And after he says certain illicit things like buttocks and homosexuals, he sort of licks his lips. It's very subtle, but you'll notice as he gets into the more illicit, sort of erotic elements of it, it's like he's enjoying saying those things. Mm.
Yeah, I noticed that too when I watched it.
View a man that serves him while dressed in a way that identifies him with homosexuality. Let's read Deuteronomy 22, verse 5, and get his feelings on this. Deuteronomy 22 and verse 5 says, "A woman must not put on the clothing of a man, nor should a man wear the clothing of a woman. For anyone doing so is detestable to Jehovah your God." So, what does Jehovah think of styles of dress that make a man look more feminine? Clearly, this is very displeasing to him. Does the way you dress show that you share his viewpoint? There's another factor to take into account. What effect could your dressing in this way have on your brothers and sisters? These clothes are designed to sexually excite both men and women. Of course, it's not your fault if someone else decides to nurture bad thoughts, but you wouldn't want to spark a wrong desire in others or be responsible for making it harder for them to resist bad thoughts. A second way you need to keep on guard is resisting the unclean habit of masturbation. The God's Love book explains that masturbation is the stroking or rubbing of the genital organs, commonly resulting in an orgasm. So, does a person have to use their hands to masturbate? For
I just had a side point. So he mentions the God's Love book. So he quotes the God's Love book, and his hand is on the Bible, but the Bible's supposed to be the authority, but this is just the subtle ways they brainwash people because the God's Love book is not the Bible, but yet their authority isn't the Bible, it's their publication. So I just noticed that how he's quoting the God's Love book, but he's got the Bible right there. Well, why does he show people in the Bible where masturbation is wrong? But that's because masturbation is not in the Bible. It's one of those things that it's not scriptural. I don't know. I just had to throw that in there.
His body posture as well, and the fact that his hands are showing and his hands are on the Bible is meant to elicit trust in him as well.
Good point. So it's like
Mm.
it's subliminal because he has his hands on the Bible, but even though he's
Yeah, and
quoting a different book, but he still's got his
yeah,
hands on
and
the
that
Bible.
his hands are showing the whole time. He's got his hands on the table and it appears slightly uncomfortable. If his hands were underneath the table, that might psychologically, you might think he's hiding something, but because his hands are showing and visible and on the Bible, it's a sign of, I'm swearing on the Bible, I'm telling the truth.
example,
You're smart. Thank you for coming on my show. The way you analyze things.
Yeah, well, I have experience in this sort of thing, so for work. So it's yeah.
say a brother wears an undergarment that's so tight it rubs his penis as he moves around. He gets aroused and
There's
even
the lip.
ejaculates.
Oh, let me rewind that a little bit.
Yeah, but we should do a count. We should do a count how many licks.
Yeah, like my hypnosis video where I counted every time you said truth.
Ridiculous. Anyway, go ahead.
Hands to masturbate? For example, say a brother wears an undergarment that's so tight it rubs his penis as he moves around. He gets aroused and even ejaculates.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to pause it too much, but this is the part where he's putting these graphic images in the minds of people who probably aren't homosexuals and people who were supposed to be exemplary when it got into Bethel. So he's giving this graphic, like the way he says it, like if a man's penis is rubbing his genitals, and I mean, however he said it, then ejaculate. Like, why does he have to give that level of detail? All he's got to do is say, "Don't wear tight pants," or whatever point that he's making. So, and this is the part where it's subliminal because on a surface level, it sounds like he's just telling them all these things are wrong, but he's putting these thoughts in their head that they're not going to be thinking of, except for the fact that he's putting it in their head.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I'm just going to go back a little bit, then I won't interrupt it again.
As he moves around, he gets aroused and even ejaculates. Is he masturbating? Yes, he is, because he's deliberately stimulating his genitals, even though he's not using his hands. Does there have to be an orgasm for it to be considered masturbation? Suppose a brother starts rubbing his genitals against a pillow. He gets an erection, but stops before having an orgasm. Is he masturbating? Yes, again, because he's deliberately stimulating himself, whether he has an orgasm or not. How about having an emission of semen at night, maybe even after an erotic dream? Is that masturbation? No.
Don't people know that though? Like this is going back to your point of he's talking to them like they're children. What he just described as something that people probably have experienced the first time when they hit puberty, like something like that. But
Yeah.
he's explaining this to a whole bunch of grown men that are supposed to be exemplary. So like, I don't know, it's just crazy. Like why do they even think that they have to tell them that that's not masturbation? I don't know.
No, and these things are private. If like there's no reason why he should be inquiring why someone is having like a wet dream, you know? There's no reason why he should know that. It's their thoughts, their dreams, and happens in their bedroom. And you know, even if you do believe in God, it's between you and God. And they're putting themselves, you know, in a position where you have to tell them your thoughts.
Yeah, and then another point too is that would anybody even think that's masturbation? Doesn't everybody know if you wake up and like you said, like if it's a wet dream, you know you weren't masturbating. It was a wet dream. That's the like, but it's
Mhm.
just even them explaining that it just they're breaking those personal barriers, like you were saying. It's none of their business, but it's like they're trying to make everything an open book and just keep talking about all this sexual stuff. But there's no reason for him to have had to tell a bunch of grown-ups that that's not masturbation.
Yeah, exactly.
Jehovah made that a part of a man's reproductive system, and it happens without any deliberate stimulation. But even so, when this happens to you, it would be good to examine whether you were dwelling on sexual thoughts before going to sleep. Could you have been sleeping in a position that stimulated you, such as with a blanket or pillow held tightly between your legs? If you're honest with yourself about these matters, it will help you to avoid falling into unclean practices. What effect does masturbation have on a person's sacred service? 2 Corinthians chapter 7 verse 1 explains what Jehovah expects of us. It says, "Therefore, since we have these promises, beloved ones, let us cleanse ourselves of every defilement of flesh and spirit, perfecting holiness in the fear of God." So Jehovah wants us to cleanse ourselves of anything that defiles our spirit. In other words, anything that contaminates our mental attitude. Masturbation contaminates a man with selfishness, it weakens his self-control, and it makes him believe that sex doesn't have to be related to love. It also fills a Christian with guilt. Trying to keep your service to Jehovah holy while under the influence of masturbation is like trying to climb a mountain with a large boulder that you're carrying. Until you free yourself of it, it can only hold you back. What have you done to cultivate a deep disgust for this practice so as to keep yourself clean? Our third point, don't let yourself become contaminated with pornography. Satan's world is in love with it in all its forms. But as you know, pornography
I got to go back because he said something that I think was one of those subliminal messages with his illustration.
related to love.
Sorry.
It also fills a Christian with guilt. Trying to keep your service to Jehovah holy while under the influence of masturbation
Okay, this part. Listen to this illustration he comes up with.
is like trying to climb a mountain with a large boulder that you're carrying.
With a large boulder that you're carrying. It's kind of similar to almost saying a large like boner. Like and a
Mm.
boulder is a rock, and sometimes it may be referred to as like being like rock hard. Not to get graphic, but I'm saying those are weird terms that he's using. Like a large boulder that you're carrying. It's unnecessary. I feel like it's the words are a little
Mm.
weird.
Guilt. Trying to keep your service to Jehovah holy while under the influence of masturbation is like trying to climb a mountain with a large boulder that you're carrying. Until you free yourself of it,
Because that illustration makes no sense. Like it just what does it have to do with serving Jehovah? Like trying to carry a mountain with a large boulder? That's not even a real example. Like who climbs a mountain with a large boulder? Like it makes no sense. And I don't know. It's probably something subliminal. I can't prove it, but it's really weird.
Yeah, and their whole stance against masturbation to me is just it's another example of control because what we see with, for example, porn addiction and chronic masturbation is that it's a reflection that something is missing in someone's life. And usually that's in the form of intimacy or connection. And so if they're not feeling seen, heard, or they're not feeling some sort of social connectedness, then they will turn to porn and masturbation. And so the fact that this is that's something that they need to continually address shows that the social interaction is lacking and they're not feeling accepted. If that makes sense?
Oh, yep. Yep, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then again, like I think to go along to your point, it shouldn't be demonized, and the way I see it is God gave people the ability to self-regulate. So
Mm. Mm. Yeah.
it can only hold you back. What have you done to cultivate a deep disgust for this practice so as to keep yourself clean? Our third point, don't let yourself become contaminated with pornography. Satan's world is in love with it in all its forms. But as you know, pornography in any form is not tolerated at Bethel. What can you do to guard yourself against becoming contaminated with pornography, even by accident?
We stop it.
Take precautions.
So just it's interesting that he says pornography is not permitted at any time in Bethel. Because what he's doing is it's erotic, it's spoken erotic literature. Him saying these words and acting as if it's not a form of pornography. And you'll see towards the end of the video, he says things that are meant to elicit images. Like you say, he's putting images in their head. And so that is pornography. So what he's saying is the only pornography that you're allowed is what's coming from them because they have very sexualized talks. This is just an example, but you'll notice as a Jehovah's Witness, a lot of the literature and a lot of the talks are, about really sexual topics.
yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point because he's coming across like they're saying, "Oh, pornography is so bad," but just like at the same time, they're subliminally using pornography on them, like basically with his words, like the same thing of putting those images in their head. So it's like he's pretending that pornography is so bad, but when you listen to what he's saying, it's the same effect as what they're trying to do. They're putting these pornographic thoughts in their head.
Yeah, and it's totally unnecessary to go into that level of detail. If you just said don't masturbate, I'm sure everyone would get the image, like they get the idea. And so, yeah, it's just unnecessary.
Yep.
Precautions to keep yourself against becoming contaminated with pornography, even by accident? Take precautions to keep yourself as far away from its path as possible. Think of the following situation. While in the bathroom, a brother starts browsing through a list of recommended pictures and videos on a social media app on his phone. He comes across provocative pictures of men or women. Some may be topless and some may be.
So I just noticed too. So when he's talking about something like pornography that is more general, the first thing he says is it could be provocative pictures of men or women. And even says men first, like, why the emphasis? He keeps putting that homosexual stuff in their minds because this is an opportunity for him to be more normal and just simply say, hey, if somebody's looking at images of women, but he makes it a point to say men first. Let me
Yeah,
just,
he puts the men first. So you could be looking at men or you could be looking at women.
yeah, so let me just play that again.
Think of the following situation. While in the bathroom, a brother starts browsing through a list of recommended pictures and videos on a social media app on his phone. He comes across provocative pictures of men or women. Some may be topless and some may be nude. He doesn't tap on them, but he does keep looking and starts to masturbate. Now, did this brother truly stumble upon pornography by accident? Or could it be that he was browsing in a place where he actually hoped to find something sexually arousing? Either way, he needs to examine himself honestly, don't you think?
And I don't know if I'm seeing things, but I feel like he did one of those creepy smiles again as he's talking about that.
Yeah,
Starts to
yeah, I caught that.
masturbate.
You caught that? Okay.
Mm.
Now, did this brother truly stumble upon pornography by accident? Or could it be that he was browsing in a place where he actually hoped to find something sexually arousing? Either way, he needs
He did. He did a little smile right there as he's talking about that.
Mm.
doesn't tap on them, but he does keep looking and starts to masturbate. Now, did this brother truly stumble upon pornography by accident? Or could it be that he was browsing in a place where he actually hoped to find something sexually arousing? Either way, he
Right there. He caught that?
Yeah, I caught that. And again, he's asking them to question themselves. So even if you did stumble on pornography, like you might have some pop-ups come up, on any site. And then he's asking him, did you do it by accident? You might have done it on purpose. And so again, you're questioning yourself instead of just, doing what most people do and flicking the pop-ups away. He's making them question themselves.
Yep.
Yeah,
actually hoped to find something sexually arousing. Either way, he needs to examine himself honestly,
there it
don't
is
you think?
again.
Maybe it would be best for him not to use the internet while isolated from others. What precautions can you take to avoid such a situation? Could certain types of entertainment expose you to the contamination of pornography, even if they're not, strictly speaking, pornographic? Suppose a brother is watching a TV program for mature audiences that contains a sex scene. Now, the scene is shot from an angle so that you can't see the intimate parts of either person. But he replays it several times and gets aroused. Is he keeping himself clean from the influence of pornography? There may not be any visible nudity, but that scene is definitely designed to arouse the person viewing it, and that's why he's viewing it over and over. He needs to work on hating what is bad.
And I just thought of another point that's subliminal is that when he's talking about a movie scene, this is an opportunity he can mention a female body part. Like he can say, and the woman's breast or the breast were covered, like something feminine, but the only time that he mentions like specific names, it's always like man on man stuff. Like it's always penis. He like this is an opportunity where he could make it more like heterosexual, like a man and woman having sex together, but it's like he's avoiding saying anything about a woman or a woman's breast or anything like that. He only uses like the names of these parts when it's talking about men. I don't
Yeah,
know if you
and
caught that.
well, but that's what I was wondering if there was another one of these videos floating out around there that address the women, if they did separate them, if anyone knows, because it's as if there aren't women there or they don't exist because they're not mentioned. It At the start, he's just saying, "Oh, we've got some exemplary brothers," and then it's not tailored to females in any way. And so I'm just wondering, is there another video or
Yeah, I think I seen
oh
part
yeah.
of a video that was for women, and
Mm.
when I what I remember seeing is that there was none of this stuff, like nothing. There was nothing lesbian. There was nothing like women on women or anything like that. And I don't even think they talked about sex much when they did it for the women,
No,
but it was a whole nother
no,
brother that did it. Yeah, it was not the same thing at all.
yeah, because women aren't supposed to have any desires or anything like that.
That's that's the way they presented it. Yep.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just noticed that where's all the scenarios about like, oh well, what if a woman is flashing a man or something like that? It's like he's only sticking to the homosexual stuff, and he's not
Yeah,
making any
and
effort. Yeah,
yeah, you'll notice he's licking his lips every time he says something sexual. He's going, um, which is a subconscious thing when he's thinking about it. So
What steps do you take to avoid entertainment that could lead you to pornography? Romans 6, verse 13 explains why we have to keep on guard in this matter. It says, "Neither go on presenting your bodies to sin as weapons of unrighteousness, but present yourselves to God as those alive from the dead, also your bodies to God as weapons of righteousness." Did you notice that a person can present their body to sin, or they can present it to Jehovah, but not both at the same time? If a Christian deliberately presents his eyes to pornography, any worship he renders to Jehovah, no matter how hard he works with the rest of his body, is no longer holy. Jehovah simply does not consent to share our hearts with pornography. Does your heartfelt love for Jehovah move you to keep on guard and avoid disappointing him? Next, we'd like to examine with you 4 ways in which all of us have to keep on guard in our conduct with others. First, it's necessary to avoid flirting, whether the other person is single or married. Now, what would you describe as flirting? Put simply, it's treating someone as if you're interested in marriage when you're really not. How can you tell the difference between
I just have to cut in on this part on a side subject is that he's claiming that flirting is basically, or let him finish talking before I break it down.
just displaying personal interest pursuing an honorable courtship and flirting? Well, a lot depends on what your intentions are. For example, a single brother compliments an outgoing single commuter sister on the way she dresses at work. On another occasion, he mentions her new hairstyle. From time to time, he sends her a text message to check that she arrived home safely. Is he just displaying personal interest? His comments go beyond being concerned for her well-being, don't they? He's even telling her that he finds her attractive. She would definitely be justified in concluding that he has romantic interest in her. Is he flirting? If he's actually interested in a possible courtship, his actions may not be wrong. But if not, he would reasonably be viewed as flirting. Could persons of the same sex start to flirt?
And you see how quick he is to want to jump back into homosexual stuff. Like, why not just stay talking the way he was talking about flirting? Because the point he's just making as far as whether or not they think people should flirt or not, but is like he couldn't stay on something normal for no longer than a minute before he's got to jump back to the same sex stuff. And again, he claimed that everyone that got accepted into Bethel is exemplary, that they reached the high standards of Bethel. So why is it all this stuff he keeps talking about? I don't know. You know what I'm trying to say? Like it's
Yeah, I understand. So in psychological literature, this is called priming. So the reason he didn't start off with the gay scenario is because that would be immediately uncomfortable for most of the people. Um, if they did have gay tendencies, they would have repressed those in order to get to Bethel. And so he started off with something, that's not offensive, is two people flirting, one male, one female. Not to say there's anything wrong with being gay. It's just in the Jehovah's Witness literature, they're very against it. And so he started off with the male and female flirting, and then he jumps into the male on male stuff. So that would be an example of priming.
and could you just
Yeah.
explain again what exactly is the purpose of priming? What is the end result of that type of tactic?
So it's like an entry into he's directing the conversation where he wants it to go. But it's not an abrupt kind of
So it's not obvious, basically, like
yeah,
okay, more
it's like
subtle.
he starts off in one direction and then he ends up where he wants to go. He wanted the conversation to go, like you said, he keeps bringing up gay, like men on men, and that was his intention from the
Exactly.
start. Yeah, exactly.
Consider a situation. A group of single brothers has a meal together, and after most leave, two of them remain behind in the room drinking alcohol. At one point, one asks the other if he has ever woken up with an erection. Their conversation starts to
So that right away is getting into whole like the pornographic stuff. Like why that's not a regular scenario. Why would two straight Jehovah's Witness brothers like why would that conversation just come up amongst adults? Hey, have you ever had like it doesn't make any sense. But I wanted to show again what we just talked about because this kind of proves it. So um he let me just go back.
a group of single brothers has a not, he would reasonably be viewed as flirting.
Okay, so as I was mentioning, the whole thing like okay, he's talking about something normal like flirting. But then, as you mentioned, the whole priming method, where he really wanted to go was the whole gay stuff again. So as soon as he jumps ship and he goes back in that direction, he then gives a vivid example. But he didn't give a vivid example with the man and woman thing.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just a
Yeah,
vehicle into where he actually wanted to talk about.
yeah.
And it's a grooming behavior. Yeah.
Because why couldn't he give the same type of um graphic example with just a man and woman flirting. So I'm going to go back just a little bit so the audience can kind of now see what we're saying. And
Mm,
this is what I meant in the beginning of the video when I mentioned that this video comes across as, oh, it's against masturbation, all this stuff, but this is what shows it's hypnosis and it's programming, it's priming, and it's meant to put these images in these young Bethelites' mind. And the sad thing is that a lot of people that go to Bethel are young men who might have lived at home with their parents and very inexperienced. A lot of them are probably virgins. And
mm.
so he's putting this stuff in their head. But just notice again how he does not give any really graphic example with flirting with a man and woman.
Displaying personal interest, pursuing an honorable courtship, and flirting. Well, a lot depends on what your intentions are. For example, a single brother compliments an outgoing single commuter sister on the way she dresses at work. On another occasion, he mentions her new hairstyle. From time to time, he sends her a text message to check that she arrived home safely. Is he just displaying personal interest? His comments go beyond being concerned for her well-being, don't they? He's even telling her that he finds her attractive. She would definitely be justified in concluding that he has romantic interest in her. Is he flirting? If he's actually interested in a possible courtship, his actions may not be wrong. But if not, he would reasonably be viewed as flirting. Could persons of the same sex start to flirt?
And notice with that example with the woman, all he basically said is if the brother says, I like your new hairstyle or something like that. Nothing sexual, right? But then now you're going to see when he gives the man example, then he gets into like sexual stuff.
Mm. Yeah.
Consider a situation. A group of single brothers has a meal together, and after most leave, two of them remain behind in the room drinking alcohol. At one point, one asks the other if he has ever woken up with an erection.
So when he gave the example of the man flirting with the woman, why couldn't he say anything sexual with that example? Why couldn't he say, oh, if the man asked the woman, have you ever uh woken up horny or something like that? Like he didn't go there with the man woman thing, but when he goes to the man thing, now he wants to get sexual.
Yeah. Yeah. So he's just programming and priming them for this conversation that he wanted to have.
Their conversation starts to touch on sexual matters. Are they flirting? Their conversation can arouse sexual desires in them, even though they're of the same sex. This could easily lead to comments or curiosity about each other's bodies. Don't deceive yourself thinking this could never happen.
And I just want to emphasize too that he didn't get that graphic with the man woman example. Nothing about sexual or anything like that or bodies. It was just, oh, he comments if she's got a nice hairstyle. So you can see the huge difference of how, for some reason, he wants to put all of this homosexual stuff in these Bethelites' mind for some reason. And he doesn't want to put any thoughts in their mind about regular man woman contact.
No, and what he's just said is very telling. What he said is, don't deceive yourself into thinking this couldn't happen. So if you do think you're straight, he's basically saying like it could happen. You could end up becoming a homosexual. When I'm pretty sure most people know whether they have homosexual tendencies or they're straight. It's, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of people will know that they're straight.
And they would know probably before they get to Bethel. They would have already known at that age for the most part.
Yeah, and the only time I've, ever heard someone having these conversations or being confused would be pre-adolescent. children and, teens. So the way he's framing it is it's as if they're very young, and I guess some of them would be very young mentally still, not having a lot of experience and not being able to trust their own intuition, which I guess is what they selected for. Coming back to the point that they're selected for individuals who will toe the line, who will follow direction without questioning it, and who are very innocent.
Keep in mind that alcohol tends to lower your inhibitions and can make thoughts that you'd normally suppress or view as repulsive seem acceptable, even inviting. What if a sister is married? Should you feel you can be more affectionate with a married sister than you would with one who's single? For example, a young single brother is adopted by a couple at Bethel, and he regularly spends time with them. The wife, who's 4 or 5 years older, hugs him affectionately in public and views him as her little brother. He goes to their room frequently, even when the husband isn't there. And he feels comfortable talking to the sister, even about his problems. He claims they're like family. Is this appropriate? No, this is dangerous. Neither one of them is immune to becoming emotionally attached to the person who is dedicating so much time and attention to them. Of course, there is nothing wrong with becoming friends with more mature couples at Bethel. But keep in mind that a married person belongs to their mate. A sister's husband has the right to expect that he will be her closest friend and the only one giving her romantic attention. What if you're married?
So again, and just goes with the programming, that would be a perfect example to say the same graphic stuff. Because he could have said, well, what if the brother is hanging out with the brother's wife, and what if she starts talking about sex? What if the woman were to ask the brother, "Oh, do you masturbate, or have you ever woke up with an erection?" Like, he could have gave that same sort of graphic scenario when he's
Mm.
talking about a man and woman, but he didn't. All that he made it seem was is emotional. So that's just, again, it's another failed opportunity where he could have still given the same instruction of, like, if it gets sexual or if people talk about their body parts or whatever, but he didn't go there at all. But then as soon as he goes back to the man stuff, then he gets graphic with all the details, and he's saying penis and all this stuff and erections, and so it's like, you can see what I'm saying, right? That, like, every time he's got an opportunity to make it even, he doesn't. He does not go there with normal sex between a man and a woman.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I see it, and it makes sense with why their literature is filled with all of this sort of um, fallacies. Yeah.
Because he should have said something like, "Oh, well, we know, what if the sister's husband invites you to the room and then she starts to talk sexual?" But nothing. He did not mention anything sexual in that situation.
Yeah, and that's something I also have a problem with the witnesses and their insistence on young people becoming friends with older people. It's part of, you know, for example, if you've ever seen the Caleb and Sophia videos, I think you pointed out the grooming within those videos and them being friends with older people. Um, and, that's something that happens with grooming. So an older person befriends a younger person who's more innocent and kind of leads them where they want them to go.
Yeah. And there's no
Yeah.
reason for it. There's plenty enough. There's so many different congregations. There's no reason that they should push these weird relationships like you mentioned, with young ones being friends with adults. It makes no sense, but it's grooming.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's isolation because if they encourage them to hang out together, then, they could make friends with their own age and they wouldn't feel so isolated. Yeah.
Being married does not give a brother permission to be overly affectionate with sisters other than his wife. You, too, need to be on guard to avoid even giving the impression of flirting. What does Jehovah think of flirting? Go to Proverbs 12, verse 22, please. Lying lips are detestable to Jehovah, but those acting faithfully bring pleasure to him. Really, flirting is lying. It's a cruel and dangerous form of lying.
So this is the side point I want to make earlier is that this is an example of how they twist scriptures. That scripture he read has nothing to do with flirting. And flirting isn't lying. Flirting is just something fun that people do. It's not lying, but this is just how Jehovah's Witnesses can twist scripture. So they're saying that flirting is lying and Jehovah hates it, but I don't know. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I know it's a side
Uh,
point, but
it's entirely subjective. If someone thinks you are flirting, and I'm in New Zealand at the moment, and so one of the things the Royal Inquiry highlighted was that some of the blame was placed on the victims of abuse because they thought that they were flirting. And some of the victims were children, in fact, and they were blamed for their flirting. And so this is another one of those concepts that Jehovah's Witnesses believe, but it's not true, because if you think someone's flirting, they might not necessarily be flirting. But if you think they're flirting, then it's enough for you to be like, oh no, they were flirting with me. And so whatever I did was justified. Yeah.
yeah, and you could just see how easy they twist it and make up their own meaning to stuff like that.
Yeah, they're really twisting the truth.
That disregards Jehovah's counsel about marriage. He hates it. So it's important for you to see it the same to remain holy. A second area we want to draw your attention to is the need to keep on guard against sexting and sexually explicit video chatting. Sexting can mean sending sexually explicit messages or even improper photos or videos by some electronic means. This is especially important to keep in mind when you're romantically interested in a sister. Jehovah created men and women in such a way that the more time they spend together, the more attracted to each other they feel. That's really a wonderful gift from Jehovah. Because of it, an honorable courtship can fan what starts out as a romantic spark into the flame of joy, a love that lasts a lifetime and keeps growing. But keeping in constant contact with a sister you're interested in and without taking the proper precautions can be like throwing gasoline on that spark, turning it into something destructive. For example, can you see how the brother in the following situation has let his guard down? While video chatting with his girlfriend, they start making some references to sexual subjects. He ends up becoming aroused, and after they finish their conversation, he masturbates. The next time they speak, the conversation goes further and becomes sexually explicit.
So I just want to stop there. So finally, he's getting a little sexual with the man-woman thing, but I think it's only one time that he does this. And he's still not giving the same detail that he does with the other stuff.
Now, both start masturbating while connected, but without exposing themselves to one another. Now, obviously, at this point, both need to get help from the elders because their conversations are becoming more and more unclean. They're on the express route to sexual immorality. But what should he have done to be on guard and not let things get to this point? At 1 Timothy 5, verse 2, Paul told Timothy to treat all his Christian sisters with all chasteness. You need to do the same, especially towards a sister you have a romantic interest in. Be aware of the danger and keep your conversations clean. Make spiritual matters a regular part of your communication. Avoid communicating late at night when you might be more likely to let your guard down. In doing so, you demonstrate that you're a spiritual man capable of caring for your prospective mate's relationship with Jehovah. Next, we'd like to help you to clearly understand what the Bible means by the phrase sexual immorality, a very serious sin that can quickly destroy your relationship with Jehovah. In the Greek scriptures, that phrase is used to translate the original word porneia. What does that mean exactly? Porneia is sexual relations involving persons not married to each other. It includes acts such as oral sex, anal sex, and masturbating another person. It always involves deliberate manipulation of the genitals and at least one other person or animal. When a Christian commits porneia, the elders always have to provide assistance. Do the genitals of both need to be manipulated for there to be porneia, such as when two people have sexual intercourse? No, both oral sex and anal sex involve the manipulation of the genitals of only one person.
And I don't know if this is more subliminal programming, but why does he even have to emphasize anal sex? I feel like he just wants to put that out there in their minds because sex is sex, like, but he specifically more than once he it's like he wants to just put that out there. I mean, I don't know, you
And
think that's deliberate?
well, not only that, he mentioned animals. Like, what what kind of sick person is thinking about animals like that? There's no need for him to
He
say that.
is. He's the one thinking about animals. That's why he said it.
It's disgusting.
And and that's the thing. So we were told at the beginning of the video that these are exemplary brothers who reach their high standards to get into Bethel, and he's got to talk about animals. But I thought these people were supposed to be so high and spiritual. It's all twisted.
Yeah, there's no need to say that. Yeah.
Does manipulation of the genitals always involve the use of the hands? Not necessarily. For example, suppose a brother pays a stripper to perform a lap dance that lasts several minutes. She grinds her clothed genitals on his leg while he's fully clothed. He becomes aroused, but doesn't ejaculate. Was that porneia? His genitals aren't being manipulated, and he's not touching the woman's genitals with his hands. However, he is committing porneia by allowing her to use his leg to stimulate her own genitals. Can there be porneia without skin-to-skin contact? Say a brother lies down on top of his girlfriend while both are clothed, and they simulate having sex.
So I just want to say, so he finally is getting more sexual now, talking about a man and woman, but all that homosexual stuff was mentioned the first 20 minutes of the video before he finally says something a little bit normal,
Yeah.
right?
So at this point, we're all feeling a bit sleepy and a bit tired, and this is where he starts to get really graphic, and it's almost like erotic literature that he's saying. He's putting really suggestive words into the listeners' minds, and then he's going to backtrack and say, "Oh, don't think about that." If say there's like an elephant in the room, and I say, "Oh, don't think about that purple elephant on a stool over there." you're thinking about it already. Like that's how your mind works. And so he's using that. Um, he's prepped us for this conversation the whole time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so it's like the whole thing was a cover. The untrained eye is gonna think, oh, they're disconcerted about masturbation and pornography and homosexuality, but in reality, they use this to hypnotically put that in your brain. They're programming
Yeah,
those sick thoughts in your head while pretending that they're against it. When
yeah,
they're
and
corrupting the mind of these young people.
yeah, and so he's put them in a position. Um, it's uh, it's sexual sadism, and it's him being in a position of master, and the Bethelites being in a position of being in a slave, and it's something that people engage in willingly. Some people, but in this case, they're not aware that it's happening to them. That because keep in mind that most sexual sadism is not physical, it's psychological. It's a psychological technique for someone to exercise control over them. So he's showing them all these really erotic images by using his words to explain things. And then he's saying, oh, but you can't think about that. And so he's exercising control over them psychologically, by arousing and then, um, you know, putting a boundary in and saying, oh, don't do this, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and if I'm correct on this, is part of that the fact that it could make them want it even more because he's put it in their heads, then kind of like, but you can't have it, and would that cause it to be more of a temptation in their mind? Like, does that make sense?
Yeah, exactly. Because they wouldn't be having all these, it's very dark and twisted what he's talking about. So they wouldn't be having these thoughts initially. So he's putting it there. And not only is he doing that, he's saying if you do have these thoughts later on that they've planted there, that they should confess to the elders. And so that's giving them more control over them.
Yeah, when you mentioned the word plant, I thought of another point too, is that that's a good word to describe it because these people coming to Bethel, like most of them are young brothers, could be lived at home with their parents. A lot of them are probably virgins. They're probably very innocent. So
Mm.
they didn't go to Bethel, and plus they had to reach their standard to get past the local elders to get approved to go to Bethel. So they're supposedly exemplary on these high standards, these high moral standards. So, like you said, they're not going to go to Bethel and have these thoughts, but he's putting these thoughts in their head. These are probably thoughts that a lot of these Bethelites never even heard of any of this stuff, like the stuff that he gets into.
Yeah, and the thing is, if you look at the psychological literature, what you repress grows. So if they're constantly repressing these thoughts, then they're going to have more thoughts and feel more guilt about it, and it has to express in other ways.
Okay, so let's see how dark he actually gets, because I know it gets much worse than this.
Yeah.
Are they committing porneia? They have their clothes on, but the genitals of both are being manipulated, so they've committed porneia, whether a climax is reached or not. That means that even some provocative forms of dancing, such as when a man rhythmically rubs his pelvis against the buttocks of a woman as she rubs herself against him, can also amount to porneia. What if a person fondles the genitals of another but doesn't actually masturbate them? For example, a brother sits on the lap of one of his male friends. His friend puts his arm around his waist and
And see, why did he have to jump back into a homosexual thing again? Why can't he just make the points that he's making, but he keeps going back to the same sex stuff for some reason?
masturbate them. For example, a brother sits on the lap of one of his male friends. His friend puts his arm around his waist and at one point fondles his crotch over his clothes. Is that porneia? Although the second man didn't go as far as masturbating the first, he is deliberately stimulating his genitals. Because there's fondling, caressing, stroking, or rubbing involved, this act constitutes porneia. What are the following situation? Two brothers masturbate in front of each other, but without touching each other. Is it porneia? The answer is no.
So I want to just make this point for those watching. All the Bethelites that come to Bethel, why would any Bethelite have this in their imagination to think, oh yeah, that we're just gonna masturbate in front of each other and put on like where did that thought even come from? They wouldn't have these thoughts, but he's planting these thoughts in their head. And another thing I want to mention too, because a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses who may watch this video, some may have never watched pornography, but only in pornography do these things happen. Like weird things happen like that. Like just to give an example, say there's a woman that's baking a cake or something, and the plumber comes over to fix the pipes, and then he comes over to fix the pipes, and the woman will just like start masturbating or something. Like that's the kind of stuff that happens in pornography. It doesn't happen in real life, but he's putting these very pornographic and like disgusting things in people's mind who wouldn't have ever even thought of these things. Um, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that point that I'm making.
Okay. So I just want to make the point that if this was happening within your workplace, say this was an introduction, and they took it somewhere that's so sexual in nature, you would have them up for harassment. It's not usual that they get into so much details. And keep in mind that it is a corporation as well as a religion. And so if you frame it in that way, you can see how inappropriate it is to have an introduction with this level, focused on sort of sexual deviancy so much.
Yeah, that's a very good point because I can recall like certain jobs have like sexual harassment videos they'll make you watch during orientation, and they're never this graphic, not even close to this. And you're right, like if any company had new employees sit down and watch an introductory video like this, they would get sued for sexual harassment. But
Yeah, exactly.
but nobody's going to question it at Watchtower because their mindset is coming from Jehovah, right? They won't ever question Bethel on something like this.
Right. And this is, for example, it's the top of the pyramid, you know. Everyone who's there has already bought into it 100%. And they have a sunk cost fallacy mindset. So they've already given themselves over to the organization with the vow of poverty, the slave contract, and through the selection process. So at this point, we can see that they're bought in 100%, and they're susceptible to whatever these people are putting in their heads.
Yeah, and I think another point to go along with that is the real meaning of exemplary in this religion, because we thought, oh, you're exemplary, that means you're spiritual, you
Yeah,
love
yeah,
God, but really what they're looking for when they say exemplary is somebody that is so brainwashed they will just do whatever and not question anything. And that's really what they're looking for. People who aren't going to question things, who are going to sit and watch this video and not question it.
yeah. And I think that's why this this video was quite hard to find, because it's been for the most part removed, and it's because it shows you behind the curtain. It's like when you meet witnesses at the door, they don't start off with Armageddon, and they don't start off with disciplining you. They talk about the kingdom and the paradise and all the happy things. It's not until you're baptized and you've bought in to the religion when they start disciplining you and making you cut off your friends and family. Yeah. So
Since
this is
neither is
just a
touching the
Oh,
sorry.
good. No, go ahead.
Um, so this is just a good example, and why I felt it was necessary to show this, because it really does show behind the curtain, and it shows at the core of Watchtower what they're looking for and what they're about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because this is not what people thought it was. What it really is heavy hypnosis and brainwashing. They're planting these thoughts in their head while pretending it's a video so that they don't do those things when really they're putting these thoughts in their head so that they do carry these things out.
Yeah, like you say, it's subliminal messaging.
other person. However, it is a flagrant disregard for Jehovah's laws and a serious sin that has to be addressed by the elders. Finally, to keep clean before Jehovah, you have to fight against homosexual behavior. You've surely noticed that we've mentioned several situations.
And I want to show this because I notice Watchtower does this a lot. Is notice that when he says that one thing, they zoom in on his face and they zoom away. So why? That's a subtle form of hypnosis. And I'm not
Mm,
sure exactly why they do that, but notice when he goes into the whole homosexual thing, they show his face really close, then it goes backwards.
The answer is no. Behavior. You have to fight against
Okay, this is the part. Notice how it zooms in, like that's some sort of hypnosis.
flagrant disregard for Jehovah's laws and a serious sin that has to be addressed by the elders. Finally, to keep clean before Jehovah, you have to fight against homosexual behavior. You've surely noticed that we've
So you see, like for some reason, they wanted his face close when he said that. I don't know why. Maybe just to emphasize the word.
yeah, I don't know to know why they are so obsessed with homosexual behavior.
sin that has to be addressed by the elders. Finally, to keep clean before Jehovah, you have to fight against homosexual behavior.
Maybe that's part of that what do you call it? Sadism.
Mm.
Like
Yeah, so sexual sadism is it would just be the control. So putting the images in their head and then telling them to repress those thoughts. Yeah, it's just a form of control,
and that's what
sexual
I'm
control.
but yeah, that's what I was saying. Like maybe that's part of this where like they zoom in as he's saying that. Maybe that's part of that sadist part where emphasizing no, you can't have it, but I'm going to continue to put it in your head, but you can't have it. So like I just noticed the way they zoom in on his face when he says that. It's like emphasizing that point that you can't, but then he's going to give you more of it.
You've surely noticed that we've mentioned several situations involving homosexuality throughout this talk. Why do you think that is? Satan is desperately promoting this perverted practice. It's no exaggeration to say that he's flooded his world with propaganda in favor of homosexuality.
So that's just interesting. So he says the reason I mention it so many times is because Satan is full in the world of propaganda. He throughout this whole talk is did exactly what he says Satan is doing, is putting flooding the whole talk with all this stuff up, blaming it on Satan, the boogeyman.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
It's not realistic to think that you can't be affected by his efforts just because you serve at Bethel. At times, you may find yourself struggling with same-sex desires, or you may realize that others are doing so. That doesn't mean that you or they are homosexuals, but it does mean that you have to keep on guard to remain holy. How can you do this?
So just one more thing I want to add is if he's saying that if you have those feelings, you need to keep on guard. How does he think that talking for 30 minutes with all that graphic stuff is going to help them not give into that, right? Like that's what he's
Yeah.
doing is he's putting so he's saying be on guard, but he's breaking their guard down by making them listen to all that graphic stuff that he mentioned in detail, which he didn't have to mention in detail.
Yeah, he's making them question their own sexuality. And if it's like, if you do have these thoughts on your own, then you might be a homosexual. But he's putting the images in their head and confusing them. So they didn't think of these thoughts. He planted them there. And so he's making them question whether they are homosexual, whether they're gay or not, because the thoughts are there. But he's like, saying, oh, if you come up with it, when in fact the person didn't come up with it, it was put there. If that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. And they won't even notice any of that because they just think it's spiritual fruit from Jehovah. So like they're just going to listen to whatever he's saying because it's Jehovah talking to them. They're not going to realize that they're like you said planting these thoughts in their head on purpose. They're just thinking it's spiritual food from Jehovah. I better listen because it's coming from Jehovah.
Yeah, and I just wanted to point out um, part of the contract of sexual sadism for people who are into that is that if you have thoughts that are considered, you know, if you're thinking about someone else, you're supposed to confess to them. So in sexual sadism and, a dominating and submissive relationship, the person who's in the submissive position, and this is consensual in this case, has to confess their thoughts to the person who's the dominant. So it really is that kind of relationship here.
Yep.
Yeah.
Examine your conduct carefully and honestly so that you avoid situations that can foster homosexual desires. For example, do you avoid unnecessarily exposing yourself to others, such as when you're in the locker room? Are you always modest, even in front of your roommates? Do you have the habit of excessively touching other brothers, hugging them tightly, slapping their buttocks?
See, he won't stop. I mean, he can't help himself.
Yeah. I've got no words.
And he's saying it so casually, like he's not even saying it as if this is anything wrong. He's kind of just saying like, "Well, do you have a habit of these things?" Almost kind of making it seem like normal. Like, let me just go back to when he first started. He's making it seem very normal.
Are you always modest, even in front of your roommates? Do you have the habit of excessively touching other brothers, hugging them tightly, slapping their buttocks, rubbing them, giving them massages, and so on? Of course, at Bethel, you may sometimes have to use a community shower, and that means you may not be able to completely avoid being briefly undressed in front of other brothers. And
So after he gives that graphic talk of slapping other brothers and all that stuff, then tells them you can't avoid basically being naked in the shower with them.
Mm.
But keep putting all that stuff in their head. Like maybe they probably would have just showered like normal people, but then now what are they going to think about when they're going to the shower with other brothers? They're going to think about that now because he put that in their head.
Yeah, absolutely. And why can't they provide showers for everyone? Why is it a communal shower?
Yeah, it should. They should all have. I would think they have like studio apartments. That's what I thought at Bethel. Like maybe only certain ones have their own bathroom, but I always thought they had their own little apartments with maybe the young people are go to some other building or something where they have showers that they have to share, but I always thought that they had their own bathroom.
Yeah, and it's probably a class system. So I would imagine the governing body has
Hmm.
their own rooms and showers, but they probably put them two together or something like that. And again, they're talking about men on men because they wouldn't put a male and a female in a room together. So when they're saying avoid being naked in front of your roommate, they're talking about either
Mhm.
male on male and female on female.
Yeah, another thing too is the way he described that, and this is where I said in the beginning of the video that they're also like turning him into like sexual predators, is that that sounds like sexual harassment more so. Like
Mm,
a guy walking by and slapping another guy in the butt, like that's sexual harassment.
yeah,
But they're
absolutely.
he's saying it like it's normal. Like he's just saying, well, do you have a habit of doing this? But that I would take that as sexual harassment.
It is, and it's normalizing sexual harassment, which is why this organization. I mean, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. But yeah, it's sexual harassment.
In some cultures, it may be acceptable for two men to walk hand in hand, or local customs may permit the use of saunas while unclothed. But if you find yourself struggling with same-sex desires, it would be wise to honestly examine whether you need to make adjustments in your conduct with other brothers. Proverbs 6, verse 27 asks, "Can a man rake fire to his chest and not burn his garments?" The answer is no. Thus, to keep yourself clean from homosexual desires, you cannot put yourself in situations that could bring them to your heart.
Okay, so this is probably the worst part of the video. He just said it's important to not put yourself in situations where they become in your heart or something like that.
Mm.
So what does he think that this video is going to do to people like that? They already have those thoughts that listening to this guy speak is going to put that stuff in your heart. Like listen to him say all that stuff for a half hour. So he's doing the exact same thing that he's telling them they need to stay away from situations that would arouse those desires. And he's giving them all these graphic examples of it.
Yeah, and I think it's meant to elicit the shame cycle. And so when they go back into their rooms and they're all alone with nothing to do, because I don't think there'd be much to entertain you there. They're going to be bored, and in the back of their head is going to be all of these images that he's put there, and they're going to go into that shame cycle, thinking that they're imperfect and they came up with this stuff themselves. And what do they have to do when they think it? They have to confess to the elders. And at that point, that's when they know that they've got them.
Yep.
Yeah.
For instance, what do you think of the following situation? After exercising together, two single brothers go back to shower in a room. Afterwards, one gives the other, who's wearing only a towel, a massage.
That's again that's pornography stuff. Like two
Yeah,
men
that's
go
not
to work
normal.
out. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just want to ask this question too to those watching is how many of these examples does he have to give? It's like he already made the point in the first probably 5 minutes of the video, but he keeps putting these graphic, like pornographic stuff, and like he keeps creating these images.
Yeah. And that's a feature of cults is the sort of perverse sexual control. Yeah.
And I also want to emphasize too that it was only like once in this whole talk did he say something sexual between a man and a woman, where he got kind of graphic, but everything
And that
else,
was a prostitute.
yeah,
The example he gave was a prostitute.
One or both of them get sexually aroused. They have put themselves in an extremely dangerous situation. Don't you agree? Although Satan is waging war to influence people's thinking on the subject of homosexuality, Jehovah hasn't changed his view on the matter. Homosexuality is unholy and repugnant to Jehovah, and he will not tolerate it among his dedicated servants.
that's the sadist part, just like you said. Right after he gives that graphic example that nobody's going to think of on their own, but he put that example in their head of the two brothers at the gym. Right after that, now he's kind of like being forceful of how wrong it is after he put the image in their head.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is why I said too earlier that every other XJW that covered this video missed the point. Because as we're breaking this down, you can clearly see this is brainwashing. They're putting these thoughts in their head, they're corrupting their mind. And this is what the whole program is about. It's not about the fact of they're against this stuff, they're putting it in their head. They're brainwashing them. It's hypnosis.
Yeah, and they're treating them, it's a master-slave relationship. It's a dominant, submissive, you have to follow orders. They're the hierarchy. You do as you're told, give everything to them. It's a power imbalance. Mm.
Does your love for Jehovah move you to have the same view? We've identified several serious dangers which we have to keep on guard against to be clean before Jehovah. Of course, more is involved than just avoiding what's bad. What else do you need to do to keep your path clean? First, have a regular program of meaningful Bible study. When you regularly spend time with Jehovah by means of your Bible study, it will make your love for him and his commandments grow. Obeying him will make you happy. Second, be honest about your weaknesses. Notice what the psalmist prayed in verses 36 and 37. Incline my heart to your reminders, not to selfish gain. Turn my eyes away from looking at what is worthless. Preserve me alive in your way. Did you notice that he recognized he needed Jehovah's help to incline his heart? In other words, to make him want to do what was right? Do as he did. Humbly acknowledge before Jehovah that you need his help to fight wrong desires. Be specific and tell him what they are, but then also act decisively. Turn your eyes away from worthless conduct and entertainment. Reject any wrong thought as soon as it comes to mind. What should you do if you now realize that you are or have been involved in some type of unclean or questionable conduct, such as what we've considered? Frankly, you might be embarrassed and even afraid to ask for help. That's not uncommon. But please think about what Psalm 119, verse 176 says. I have strayed like a lost sheep. Search for your servant, for I have not forgotten your commandments. Like the psalmist, if you've been involved in unclean or questionable conduct, seek help from the elders right away. We love you and want to help you get on a clean path again. The governing body loves you too. It's our heartfelt prayer that you, our precious young brothers, will keep your path clean and joyfully walk in the law of Jehovah forever.
Well, I'm glad we got through that so that we never have to
Yeah,
watch that again.
yeah. As traumatic as it is, and as sick as it is, I just wanted to point that out because, it's something that just shows you what they're all about, basically. And the way they abuse people and the way they put thoughts in their head, in a sense, they weren't trying to cover it up in that video because the people there had already bought into their religion. So, but I never want to watch that again. And now that we've covered it, yeah, can put it away.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, I hope this doesn't put you on the spot, but could you explain to my audience just a little bit of just your background, why, like how it's easy for you to spot this? Because you're very skilled at being able to see through people and see through stuff like this. Because most people watch that Pillowgate video and that went way over their head on what was actually going on, and you could see right through it. And even other stuff that you sent me, like other stuff that I've been working on. you definitely have like a sense of being able to basically spot, I would say, like predators and that type of behavior. You just seem to be like you can spot it very well. What is it about your background where it's like you're a psychologist where you can see it and you can understand it and expose it and break it down?
So it's twofold. For example, my personal history with being an outsider within both the congregation and I'm Australian, so my family is Indigenous. And so there's that aspect of us being outsiders within our own culture and within the congregation of me not being accepted. So I was there and I would just watch things. And so that led me into a social work kind of. I studied and then I practiced social work. And so that was working with abuse victims. So some of this stuff comes from psychological literature and what I know about abuse and grooming and the ways in which it takes place. And so, yeah, for me, it's easy to spot these things, having worked with people who have been abused. And like you say, the cycle of abuse, it's them planting the images and grooming people. The whole process is designed to select individuals who are susceptible to be controlled. And, you know, you yourself were not, you weren't susceptible, so they didn't accept you into Bethel. Yeah, and individuals like yourself who are free thinkers are not what they want. They want young, innocent people who they can show have been susceptible to their brainwashing. Yeah. So that's a bit about my personal background and why I'm so passionate about this particular um, this particular case and protecting children and young people.
Must have been really pissed off with the whole Royal Australia Commission, seeing how you're from Australia too, when that whole thing was exposed.
Yeah, actually, it was from a congregation very near mine, one of the cases, and I knew one of the people involved, not personally, but I knew who they were. And so for me to see the reaction of Jehovah's Witnesses in victim shaming and also making excuses for the elders involved, it made me very angry. And, you know, I think we should protect children because they're vulnerable.
And could you also explain a little bit about what's going on in New Zealand? Because I'm kind of confused about that too, but I know there's something similar taking place, like the Australia Royal Commission, but in New Zealand.
So the New Zealand inquiry into abuse into care is part of a larger inquiry of the government into institutionalized care. And the Jehovah's Witnesses were the only religion to fight back against the inquiry in New Zealand. And not surprisingly, the commission into the inquiry into abuse within care had similar findings to the Australian inquiry that most people would be familiar with. Basically, the Jehovah's Witnesses made the argument that they do not have pastoral care over their congregations, which to anyone who's been a Jehovah's Witness is ridiculous, because essentially they're claiming that they're not in control of the congregations and they're not responsible for their well-being, which is what pastoral care means. It's a generalized term. So the Jehovah's Witnesses tried to say that they don't have the care over the congregations, and the inquiry has come back and they've said, well, yes, you actually do, and also that they were negligent in providing that care. So they neglected to provide safety for the people who were abused, and their reporting processes were seen as inadequate. Some recommendations were that they remove the two witness rule and that they include women in the process, in the judiciary process, and put them in positions such as elders, because that's seen as sort of a regressive policy. that they don't include women in positions of power and is not really acceptable anymore. And so some of the findings were that the children that were abused were also blamed for their abuse, and that the people who were handling it, the elders, were not trained to handle abuse, and they were investigating it as if they were trained to do it. And they were also speaking to the abuser before the victim, and giving them warnings and stuff like that instead of going to the police. And so the inquiry found that the way they handled it was inadequate, and that their policies and procedures in place supported the abuse continuing, and they weren't adequate to address the abuse, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so what's the next step at this point? Is it going to be like a big trial, or is it what's going to happen now?
Yeah, so from what I've heard, the Jehovah's Witnesses are going to fight it all the way. They've doubled down, and it's supposed to go to the Supreme Court, as far as I know. So, but they will probably lose because of the findings so far. And what's at stake here is they could possibly lose their religious status, which would make it less appealing for them to be in New Zealand as an organization, because there's not that huge profit margin. They'll have to pay tax on any assets. And they've already listed their Bethel for sale, actually. So I think they're preempting that result already. Yeah. Which is a win as far as I'm concerned.
Oh yeah, yeah. And if they go to Supreme Court, yeah, they're going to lose. So I look forward to that.
Yeah, and it's good also because now we have the New Zealand and Australian commissions, and they have similar findings. And so this really calls into question, some Jehovah's Witnesses will say, oh, it's just, a couple of bad eggs, a couple of people who did that, and it's not a reflection of the organization. But what the inquiry found was that it was the policies and procedures that led to the abuse continuing. And so now that we have two, it's a really good look into how the organization structures itself. Yeah, and how it allows abuse to continue. So really happy with that.
Yeah, and thank you for explaining that, because you're actually in New Zealand. So
Yeah,
you're there in
and I was
person.
in Australia at the time of that commission, so I'm in a good position to comment on both of those things.
Yeah, and maybe that's why you have a special calling too, to expose Watchtower on these issues. I mean, that is a weird coincidence. You were in Australia when that happened, then you moved to New Zealand, and now this is happening. So you were there in both of these places.
Yeah, and I hope other countries start to look into it as well. So,
But thank you very much, and I'm sorry that I had to put you through watching that video and listening to that guy, but we never have to watch it again. We did it. We put the evidence out there, so now we never have to watch that video ever again.
well, thank you, Quinn. Thank you for putting it all out there and for helping me to awaken to Watchtower's the reality of what it is. And yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming.